Hey, you have Patrick Findaro here, co-founder at Visa Franchise and Vetted Biz. I'm here with Brandon Meyer of Meyer Law Group. Brandon's an immigration attorney, managing partner at Meyer Law Group, most focused on employment visas and investor visas, such as the E2 visa. Today, we're going to talk about all you need to know about the E2 investor visa, what the requirements are, process, some of the recent updates, as well as go into how you can get a green card and some potential paths for those that are using the E2 visa as a bridge and eventually want to live permanently in the United States and have a green card. So, Brandon, really appreciate having you on.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you for the invitation. Looking
Definitely.
forward to our discussion.
And if anyone has questions, just type in the comment box and we'll try to address that on this live stream. And it could be anything that's really more geared towards investor visas, particularly the E2 visa. And afterwards, we're going to be sharing Brandon's contact information if you'd like to set up a consultation to discuss your case. But Brandon, let's get right into it. What is the E2 investor visa?
Yeah, so the E2 investor visa is one of the oldest visa categories that the United States has had for allowing people overseas. The first E2, the E2 is based upon treaty, trade and investment treaty between the United States and a particular country overseas. The first E2 treaty in existence was with the United Kingdom, which dates back to the 1800s, as an example. So right now, there's about 90 countries worldwide whose nationals and citizens can qualify for an E2 visa because their country has the requisite treaty with the United States.
So some countries in Latin America, I know, like Mexico, Argentina, Colombia, I think pretty much all of Western Europe besides Portugal. But there's some big countries that aren't eligible, right?
That's correct. So the kind of the big omissions from the E2 list, in no particular order, are People's Republic of China, India, and Vietnam are three examples that stick out as their citizens not currently having E2 eligibility.
Yeah, it makes sense. We've had quite a few clients that basically get citizenship by investment in another country like Turkey or Grenada
Mhm,
from those countries, or even Brazil. We've had a lot of Brazilians over the years, and
mhm.
a lot
Oh
of
yeah,
Brazilians have
Brazil.
like a great grandfather who was Italian, and they use that ancestry to get the dual nationality, and then use that
That's
passport.
right. Brazil's another great example of a country who's currently omitted from the list. So then individuals start looking back to their family tree to see who has a grandparent from Italy or Spain or somewhere in Western Europe that does have the E2 treaty.
And I've heard different things. Like the program, the E2 visa treaty got canceled between like Bolivia and Ecuador. Apparently, it was more Bolivia and Ecuador canceling it. And then I know Iran had the E2 treaty, but it got canceled. I
That's correct.
imagine that's more the U.S. But what do you see? Like, why doesn't a Brazil have the E2 treaty?
I mean, because basically the U.S. and the Brazilian governments have yet to come to an agreement to allow and it's bilateral. So very difficult for U.S. citizens, for example, to obtain investor visas to go to Brazil, and likewise. So these
Yeah,
are all big.
China. I would be eligible to start a tech company in China if they had
Yes.
the E2
And so you'd
treaty.
have to look at other options. And so, and sometimes these negotiations drag on for years and years and years. So the most salient example of that is Israel. So Israeli citizens have qualified for what's known as an E1 treaty trade visa for as long as I can remember. But negotiations and the subsequent implementation of E2 privileges for Israeli citizens has been dragging on for 10, 15 plus years now. I think it's only now that Israeli citizens are
Yeah,
eligible.
really recently.
Yeah.
And then they implemented it, then the reciprocity schedule went up and
Mhm.
down, so
Yeah,
definitely
and
seems like a moving target.
that's the other thing too is that there's most E2 visas are good for 5 years, but it is based upon agreed reciprocity. These do change. So, cite an example for Mexico. So, 15 years ago, Mexican citizens were issued 5-year
Hmm.
E2s. And basically overnight, the US government cut that reciprocity to 1 year.
Which is a
And
big pain.
a
Every
big
year, if
one.
you're traveling, you have to renew it.
I mean, it's great for immigration attorneys such as myself because you're basically constantly renewing someone's
You're
E2.
busy. You're checking that the business plan's good and that
Yeah,
they're gonna get approved again.
but it's so inefficient
Yeah.
for, I would imagine, for the U.S. government to basically have to keep renewing or keep having visa appointments every year, and not to mention the stress and trauma on the business and the family having to maintain in E2 compliance basically on a consistent basis.
Yeah, it's a really moving target, and I saw that under the previous administration, like, Mexico went back up, not to
Hmm.
5 years though, but 4 years, and
Yeah.
then Chile went from 5 years to 1 year, so
Hmm.
it's definitely important to monitor these things if you're exploring the E2 investor visa.
And France has I believe, cut the reciprocity for the U.S. down to, I think it was like either 3 months or 1 year. But fortunately, the U.S. government has not retaliated yet against French
I
nationals.
didn't know that, that's wild.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think it's still at 25 months, I'd imagine?
Hmm.
Something like that?
Yes. And
Cool, okay.
so we mentioned a few times about nationality, and so basic requirements for an E2 visa are is that a U.S. business has to be at least more than 50% owned by nationals from the treaty country. So if you know, so for example, if you want to qualify for E2 as from Mexico, two things have to happen. You and any other subsequent applicants for the E2 business all have to have Mexican passports, and the US business has to be more than 50% owned by Mexican nationals, either individuals with Mexican citizenship and or entities registered out of Mexico. That's the kind of base bare requirement. And so sometimes that there's impact if you sell the business and the business falls below 50% ownership. That can lead to the instant revocation of all the E2 status. So this is something to 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 mention, to keep in mind going forward. But that 50% ownership issue is a bare requirement, bare minimum
And
requirement.
there's the investor visa, and then there's also the manager visa, which most of our clients at Visa franchise have done the investor visa. But
Yes.
as they've grown their business, they've brought in family members or fellow countrymen to be managers at the E2 visa business. So maybe it'd be good just to talk about the manager option as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, so mostly, some of the biggest multinational companies in the world are heavy users of the E2 treaty, E2 visa, such as Sony or Allianz, or any of the big, any of the big companies. They've been using these for decades to transfer, personnel to the U.S. On E2 visas. The E2s that we're talking about in this context mostly would be in the startup realm or purchase of an existing business realm, depending on the particulars. But it'll generally start off as the investor, the manager, the owner main will usually process the E2 first. But as the business grows, and depending on its growth trajectory, the business can sponsor additional E2 employees, skilled personnel, managerial personnel, to come to the US on the E2 visa as well.
When
Now,
can you start considering sponsoring managers? Like, is that when you have 5 employees, 10 employees?
yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And that's one of the challenges of the E2 visa we should talk about is, unlike EB5 and some of the other type of visas out there, there's no real strict numerical requirements for what constitutes an approvable E2. And so, each consular post and embassy out there has their own sort of unofficial standard for what qualifies. So, for example, one consular post may approve an E2 for an additional investment for an initial investment of say 50,000, whereas another consular post won't approve anything under say 150, 200, 250,000, depending on the business. So it's very important to know, the standards, the unofficial standards of the post that you're applying at before you apply. Because otherwise, for example, if you take a $50,000 investment to U.S. consulate in Vancouver or London or Toronto, there's zero chance of it getting approved.
How do you go about getting that market color? Like, I know because we've had clients in Pakistan and Egypt, it is much, much harder to get approved than Canada, Australia, for
Mhm.
example.
It's just, you just have to rely on, you definitely need solid legal advice, and whoever you hire, whether it's Meyer Law Group or someone else, you just have to know the lay of the land.
And
Uh,
are you in do you have, like, a nice network of attorneys that are doing good volume at E2s and you
yeah,
trade notes kind of on what
yeah.
the
Yeah, we have a
pattern
we
is?
have a discussion group that's constantly discussing. Right now the hot topic seems to be E2 adjudications out of the U.S. Embassy in Rome. Apparently, there's some
Hmm.
not very positive developments out of that post. Same as Paris. So it's just a part being in the network and working with people who this is what they do, and won't send you to Vancouver with a $25,000 investment. But to answer your question, at what point is it good for a company? Okay, so they get the initial, and should bear in mind too that initial E2 approval is a two-step process. First, the U.S. company itself has to be approved as an E2 treaty enterprise by the consulate or embassy. And then once that's done, that's when the first transferee can submit their individual visa application. Then after that, any number of subsequent employees, as long as they have the nationality, can apply. Um, but then, Patrick's like, well, if you have 5 people in the U.S., is that a good time to start transferring personnel, or is it 10? And the answer is, it really depends on the consular post
Yeah.
and how well the business is doing in the U.S. I think most consular posts you could probably submit that second E2 application if you have 5 people in the U.S.
Okay.
It'll certainly be easier if you have 10. You know, the one because there's no guidelines in terms of investment, as we mentioned. There's also no guidelines in terms of headcount or revenue.
Which
It's
is
all
probably good and bad.
it's good and bad. It's good in some instances. It's bad in others. So, as a practitioner trying to advise on these points, my answer to everything is more is always better than less. I mean, you can't go wrong. I mean, if you hire more people, if you invest more money, if you have more revenue, if you just have more and more and more, it makes it so much easier for a U.S. consular official to approve your application.
Yeah,
You
because
know,
if they deny, they could potentially be, letting go of 8 employees, and the
that's
US, Department of State doesn't want that happening.
No, absolutely not. But then if it looks like to the consular officer that you, the applicant, are trying to get this through with the absolute bare minimum of everything, investment amount, business idea, headcount, revenue projections, then that just makes it easier for the officer to feel good about denying your case, which is obviously what
Yeah,
we don't want.
besides we've had 400 plus clients over the last 6 or
Mhm,
7 years. We've had a couple cases where the client was denied and didn't try again,
mhm,
where they said they didn't have the intent to go back to their country, and it was like someone that had property, a business in their home country. So those didn't make sense to me, but
mhm.
all the other denials we've had have been overcome when they apply again, and it
Yes.
was something basic like not having a signed lease
Mhm.
or just investing $42,000 where the business really needed 120K to get off
Right.
the ground.
Right. And also too, they do it. So if you're trying to do, say, a manufacturing facility versus trying to do, let's just say, a boba tea franchise, for example,
Yeah.
obviously, to get a manufacturing facility off the ground is going to require substantially more capital and more headcount than it would be for a boba tea shop. And the consulates do look at that, do a judge that. It's known as the principle of marginality. It's not, so basically, it's not only is the business capitalized enough? Is the plan sufficient and proportional for the type of business that purports to be operated? And more importantly, is it just a business that, for, one or two investors and their families to just, basically get by
Yeah.
make a living, or is it, more substantial than that, and to generate profits and generate, subsequent business activity? And it needs to be the latter and not the former. But again, there's no bright line between what's a business just to help you pay your mortgage and your kids' school's tuition, and what's a business that's going to generate substantial profits to be used
And
elsewhere.
I've heard
So,
it also depends on like the job creation impact. Like there's a lot of these E2 visa businesses like Michelin or Siemens that I'm sure they have some bad years, but they're
yeah.
employing 400 Americans. So
Hmm.
are they going to deny those E2 visas?
Very, very unlikely. Very unlikely. In those instances, individuals will only be denied if if their job at the company is considered too low level.
Okay.
That's
That's good to
really
know.
the major risk for those types of large corporations transferring people, to have their E2 employees denied. But however, each company does have, even the Sonys and the Siemens of the world, every 5 years or so, they need to reapply, re-register their companies,
Hmm.
um, at the consulate or embassy, and so they have to go through that process. The company themselves has to go through that process every 5 years, or however long the reciprocity treaty is. So there are checks and balances, even with the big companies, to make sure that everything's, in compliance.
And how I see it, you can start a business, whether that's
Mhm,
your own business, independent business, a franchise. You could
mhm,
buy an independent business. You could
mhm,
buy an existing franchise.
mhm.
Any path that's a little easier from the approval side that you kinda like to see?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, the purchase of an existing business is there's a chicken and the egg problem with
Yeah,
the E2 visa, and so, which has been kind of exacerbated by 2 years of international travel restrictions. The E2 is one of the few visas where the U.S. government will sort of overlook, you coming over to the U.S. on a visitor visa, and basically getting your business up and running before you go back, basically working,
exactly.
which you're not supposed to do in a
There's
tourist
like a
visa.
fine line, you can't really be you can own a business, but you can't be managing people.
Right. But if you go to the consulate, and they're going to say, as you mentioned, where's your lease? Where's
Yeah,
your corporate bank accounts? Where's the investment into the accounts? Where's the business activity? And you can't say, well, I haven't been able, I've been stuck in Abu Dhabi for 2 years, and I haven't been able to go to the US to kickstart things. The consulates have been denying those, saying, "Oh, there's not sufficient business activity in the U.S. to justify the approval." And you say, "Well, the reason why there's no sufficient business activity in the U.S. is
you get
because
there.
I haven't been able to get there."
Yeah.
And it's been, you're basically talking in circles. And some of the consular posts, it's been a real struggle to get them to accept the obvious. Now, from that basis, purchasing the existing business is probably more straightforward, because
Yeah, you have the
there's
numbers,
you have the
everything's there.
numbers, you have the
Yeah.
paper trail, the lease is already created, the bank accounts already exist, you have the head count, you have the financials, you have business operations. Basically, you're just showing the transfer of, ownership from, one person or group to another, and providing a plan for how you're going to grow that business, and showing subsequent investments. So that's an easy, especially nowadays where travel to the US is difficult.
Yeah.
That's a Seems to me a much simpler proposition than to trying to create a business from scratch in the
Yeah,
US.
it makes sense. We
But then
do
it's
have
also,
clients doing franchise resells, and
Mhm,
then there's some instances where the franchise like, there's a cell phone repair business where you can open up in a Walmart, and basically
mhm,
the franchisor gives a turnkey product, the
mhm,
business. So they're handling all those things that you can't do remote.
yeah,
And I see it in our experience, 2 to 3 months to find and invest in a franchise.
mhm,
It's gonna take more time on an existing business, especially in, like, South Florida because of the due diligence, and
mhm,
you probably have to go through a few businesses to find out that guy didn't pay taxes, this guy doesn't do payroll, he just pays his employees cash.
yeah,
But if you have the time, a year, 2 years, It could be less, it could be 6 months, it could be 3 months.
Yeah.
Then I say the existing business is a great opportunity to explore.
Hmm.
Franchise resales can be kind of a nice medium where it's existing business, but a little more buttoned up, and you kind of know what you're getting into
Hmm.
rather than like an independent one.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, like, whatever the E2 investor decides to do, set something up from scratch, buy a franchise resale or some other existing business. It really comes down to gut instinct of like, what do you feel best in terms of investing in,
What
and
did you do before?
what
Did
did
you
you do
run your own
before?
business and you've always been an entrepreneur?
Hmm.
Maybe try to do the same thing in the US. Don't reinvent the wheel.
Yeah, and because you don't want a scenario that, the hypothetical scenario that I'm about
Yeah.
to. This is more of an EB5 context where, like, you know basically, a person comes over, sets up a business in a completely different, comes over from Vietnam and sets up a completely different business than they were, accustomed to, hypothetically, and then starts running the business like they would in a business in Vietnam, which is like, paying people under the table, tax evasion,
Yeah.
denying people
Can't
work
do that.
breaks, making comments about their height and weight and whatever else. And, you know, yeah, I mean, that's the thing you have to accept is that when you set up your E2 business, whatever it is, you're doing business in the US. So
Which is a
whatever,
great market and you can make a lot of money, but
yeah,
margins are tight and it's a little different.
you,
Competition's tight, I
yeah,
should say.
especially since you're still in the until you get your green card, you're still in the realm of oversight by the U.S. immigration bureaucracy. You have to do things, quote unquote, by the book. Pay your taxes, put people on payroll, don't pay them under the table. Run your human resources policies in a compliant manner, because if any one of those shortcomings, it could have an impact on your ability to continue getting your visas renewed. So you know having the appropriate people, business advisors in the US that can kind of help guide you through the nuances of differences in US regulatory and business culture are very important to your long-term success.
Definitely. And yeah, there's some startup consultants that will also do the immigration business plan that we can connect
Mhm.
clients to. And on the business broker side, if you're buying an existing business in Florida, it's much easier because
Mhm.
basically there's like an MLS where there's 2,000 plus businesses for sale,
Mhm.
and there's buy side and sell side representation. So you can just work with one business broker and they'll guide you through everything.
Mhm.
But California is kind of a pain because there's not that consolidated database. So if you're looking to buy a business in California, you're going to have to go on bizben.com, bizbuysell, and you're probably going to have to talk to 10, 20 business brokers to see kind of what opportunities there are. So it's a little bit more of a cumbersome process, depending
Yeah,
on the state.
but that's still probably better than buying your brother-in-law's restaurant.
Definitely.
You
And you
know,
see, I mean, sadly, at least in South Florida, you see a lot of people of the same nationality kind of screwing each other over, where there's that level of language, cultural trust. And it might be an Argentine selling a trucking business that the two trucks actually don't work, but he's going to sell that trucking business. Or in Texas, there was a fraud, a quesadilla restaurant, and they were a Mexicans selling quesadilla restaurants to other Mexicans, where
mhm,
you have that level of trust, same culture. And sadly, you have some bad players that are taking advantage of that trust.
mhm. Yeah, so yeah, due diligence if you're going to go either which of the three routes you go is very critical to
Yeah.
the
I
long
say
term.
definitely lawyer up with a corporate attorney and or
Mhm.
franchise attorney.
Yeah,
We tell all our clients that it's well worth the cost, especially if you're investing $100,000. It's going to be a fraction of that.
definitely, because like the last thing that any of us want is spend all this money and time and come to the U.S. and not be able to renew your visa the next time. And so one of the issues I see renewal, people come to the U.S. They, is basically all these partners are working separately. And so what happens is, a person comes in on the eat. Yeah, they do everything right at the beginning, but then when they get their visa, into the U.S., they start running their business. We all they lose touch with all of us, usually until it's time to renew the visa. And then what happens all too often is, they went and engaged a CPA, local CPA. It's like, oh yeah, it's all great. We're going to do this the American way. We're going to load
Yeah,
up
pay as little taxes, every
as little
expense,
taxes as
employee.
possible.
Yeah.
So maybe it's not right, but I'm going to put your kid's private school tuition on your 1120. No, don't get the Camry, get the S class. Call it a corporate write off. It's all great. And oh wow,
You have
there's
10 home offices.
yeah, your home office and on the beach somewhere. And oh great, you just showed a big loss in your 1120 and you don't have to pay tax. Great, that's great that's problem is when you take that tax return back to the US Embassy in Seoul or the US Embassy in London, all they're going to see is that negative
You're
number.
not making money.
You're not making you're losing
How the hell are
money,
you
you're losing
staying here?
loads of money. And so we don't think your business is going to survive because you lost, wow, your revenue was X, but your loss was 2X. Like,
And
yes,
you can't really backtrack. No, but I'm actually my brother, my son, they're working for us.
yeah, my CPA that my brother recommended told me that, yeah, no, it's too late by then. Way too late.
We
I
see a
mean,
lot of our clients when Jack and I, my brother and business partner, started Visa Franchise in 2015. We thought there would be like a ton of renewals, but
mhm,
we have seen that a lot of our clients, they do a green card in the first 5 years. So whether that's EV5, direct, regional center, the spouse gets employed. Could you just walk through maybe a couple of the
yeah,
most popular green card paths or what
that's
someone should consider?
no, absolutely, because yeah, the E2. I mean, we say it's 5 years. It's 5 years for about 75% of the countries.
Yeah.
So it gets you there for 5 years, but it's a pain to have to renew it every 5 years for some of the reasons we've already discussed. And so your kids are in school. If you have children, you're starting to get settled. The last thing you want is that surprise at the embassy 5 years later saying, "Oh, you've been denied," and all your visas have been canceled, and oh, so what? We don't care if you have a business and homes and your kids are in school. Too bad, figure
You're
out.
exposed at the end of the day. There
Yeah,
could be some lower level
totally.
bureaucrat that says no, and
Yeah.
you can
And so,
fight it, but you might have to fight it outside the US.
right, which is inconvenient for lots of reasons. And so,
Yeah.
you know, people realize that, well, okay, well, I mean, I would think after 18 to 24 months, if not less, you'd probably figure out whether or not the US is a place that you and your family want to stay. At that point, I think you really need to, or whenever you've come to that point,
Yeah.
you need to really figure out what's your path to stay permanently in the US, to get a green card. It's theoretically possible to get to leverage your E2 business into getting a green card, but practically speaking, it's almost impossible. For example, most people who immigrate to the U.S. through jobs or their business do so through what's known as the labor certification process. But you really can't do a labor certification for yourself if you own the business. It's basically the second question on the labor certification application form. Do you or someone close to you have a substantial ownership interest in the business? Yes or no. You check yes, it's an automatic denial. You check no, and they find out, well, you're going to be deported for fraud. So basically, you can't do the EB2 or EB3 process for yourself, at least, or as the owner of the business. Now, if your spouse, E2 spouses have unrestricted or eligible for unrestricted work permits in the U.S. So if your spouse gets a job at, say, Meta or Alphabet or whoever,
Yeah.
then there's nothing to preclude your spouse's employer from entering them in the E2, EB2 or EB3 process, and the whole family getting green cards through the spouse's employer sponsorship. We see an increasing number of E2 holders obtaining green cards through that way, through spouse coming to the U.S., getting a job
I
with
think
a
that's
company.
probably the
So,
most common way for our E2 visa
yeah.
clients, especially those that maybe could afford the EB-5, but it would be
Mhm.
like 80% of their net worth.
Yeah.
Maybe it makes sense to explore some other green card opportunities and preserve your capital.
No, absolutely. And but you mentioned EB-5. Fortunately, some E2 visa holders are able to leverage their existing E2 business into what's known as a direct EB-5, meaning that they've invested at least 500,000 or more into their E2 business, and they have headcount of 10 or more full-time U.S. workers. And so any E2 visa workers you have do not count toward the 10 toward the 10 workers. Any family members you have doesn't really count toward the 10 workers. Has to be, basically, you know, as I used to advise my E2 Mexican clients, one gentleman, when I went through the process, he's like, "So you may have to go hire 10 people off the street that I don't know that have U.S. passports or green cards?" I said, "Yeah, basically."
Yes.
That's the rule. But some people are able to leverage their E2 business into a direct EB-5.
Yeah, we've had clients and we have current clients right now that are looking at businesses, and
Mhm,
it's a little tricky. Just don't like invent the jobs. Look first at a business that needs like at least 12 jobs, so there's a little
mhm.
cushion.
Yeah.
And we found that healthcare is a good one. Some
Mhm,
service businesses, like in the pet space, we're
mhm,
gonna have a bunch of pet groomers or just service providers that need to be there. And one concept in the healthcare space, doing education with children on the spectrum of autism,
mhm,
behavioral therapy, where it's one child, one therapist.
mhm,
That's a lot of jobs. Same with preschools.
mhm.
So there are opportunities that we've seen at Visa franchise, but yeah, it definitely needs to make business sense and
Yeah.
not to kind of trying to morph the business into an EB-5 project.
Yeah. Because the challenge, even whether there's an E2 business involved or not, that's always the challenge with direct EB-5 is that people do two things with direct EB-5. Number one, they vastly overestimate their entrepreneurial abilities. And number two, they vastly underestimate the difficulty of hiring 10 US workers at the investment threshold for EB-5.
Yeah, we
And
see more. It's like 600, 700K.
yeah.
At 500K, I mean, there's minimal opportunities. Just you're gonna blow through 200K. If you have 10 American workers that you're each paying 30K,
Mhm.
that's 300K a year that you're paying. So you
That's
blow through
absolutely
that
right.
capital really fast.
That's absolutely right. So yeah, so the $500,000 EB-5 is ends up being something substantially more
Yeah.
to grow the business to meet the employment targets. And so when a lot of people look at that, if they can't grow their business is doing well by their standards, and they continue renewing their E2s, but they realize because their children are quote unquote aging out, approaching 21, and they need a permanent solution that say, okay, well, they can't grow their business into a direct EB-5, and they then turn around instead opt for something that's in the regional center space, basically a passive investment in a green card, which two problems with that. One, the regional center program has currently been suspended
Yeah, not
since
on.
July 1st, and then that requires the investor to have a spare 500,000 plus available to invest
Exactly.
in that other project. Some people do, some people don't. There's ways to finance it, but then yeah, then we have to be careful of not approaching the scenario that you outlined earlier, Patrick, about people having 80% of their net worth tied up in EB-5.
Yeah. I mean, you gotta, as an entrepreneur, you have to kind of take calculated risk.
Mhm.
And, if you're involving your family in this endeavor too, you got to think about that.
Yeah,
Uh,
it just so I tell people it just has to work.
yeah.
It just has to work. Failure is not an option here.
In any business, there's failure.
Yeah.
We try to limit it as much as possible at Visa franchise. And
Mhm.
it's like 15% of the time there's an issue.
Yeah.
They inject more capital than they originally anticipated, or they're
Mhm.
going to close the business. 85% of the time it goes pretty well. But
Mhm.
still, there's a real chance that the business is going to fail. And what are
Yeah.
you going to do in that situation?
Right. How many businesses are out there really where the capital investment is a one-time only event. Very,
Exactly.
very
Yeah,
few.
it's very common, especially with this pandemic. I mean, owners
Mhm.
contributed more capital into their business to keep the lights on.
Yeah, I mean, say even Google, like how many fundraising rounds did they have before? 5, 6, 7? Like,
Exactly. We
yeah.
wanna keep it to just one time and
Mhm,
have that, 3 months, 6 months of working capital,
mhm.
but there are times that more capital needs to be injected. One green card category that our clients have limited experience with, but I have one client working with his immigration attorney on is a special ability visa, the EB1A, I believe,
Yeah.
and working on basically producing more articles and being a thought leader in that space.
Mhm.
Do you have any experience with that? Someone that has the E2 or another non-immigrant visa and wants to go to EB1A?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I was going to mention that. It's like at the beginning, I was talking about there's limited ability to translate the E2 business into a green card, and I got off talking about how EB2, EB3 isn't an option. The one sort of potential option is what's known as the EB1 subcategory A, alien of extraordinary ability. And
Mhm.
so that's more of a self sponsorship, like meaning basically you could have a company behind it, but you don't need to. And there's various subcategories of the EB1A. So EB, extraordinary ability in the arts, sciences, athletics, but most in business. Most of the ones that we see in E2 realm would be focused on extraordinary ability in business. And so that would be documenting, you know, it really requires the US business to basically exceed it beyond all expectations and really capture, generate a lot of press, generate, lots of revenue, lots of profitability. I'm trying to think of what would be a good example. So
Is it also something that's more innovative? Like, it's probably a little difficult if it's, like, just a little food
possibly, that
truck.
would be fall into the sciences. So, like, someone was
Okay.
working at a tech company or a biotech, and they invent something that's great and wonderful. They would try to go the EB1 route, but um, for I mean, this is probably a bit of a dated example, but for
Sure.
example, Rupert Murdoch, when he was moving to the U.S. from Australia, he could have used the alien of extraordinary ability in business subcategory to do that. I don't know if he did or not, but he could have, based upon the success of his media businesses in Australia and the UK prior to coming to the US. Um, these do come up occasionally, but you know they're almost kind of like they come up almost as much as the purple unicorn, really.
Sure, that's fair.
But it's always an option worth looking at, because it is kind of a fast track. Um, but yeah, the the hurdles to climb for the EB1A are pretty steep.
And can you go E2 to EB2 NIW? Is that kind of like the EB1A light?
Yes and no. The trick with the NIW, National Interest Waiver, is really the only way you can get those approved. And this has been true since like matter of New York Department of Transportation decision in 1998. It's basically if you, the applicant, have a letter from someone at the U.S. government saying that what you do is in the national interest, then
Hmm,
they'll approve it. You
okay.
don't see that, it's going to be very difficult. So,
Wow.
and yeah, I mean, this is one of the things is, you know, especially in recent times where, we have almost not 6 months of no EB5 regional centers. Um, while many countries that where people want to leave, they don't have the E2 ability. Um, they started looking at these national interest waivers and these aliens of extraordinary ability. And unfortunately, and to be quite frank, I have yet to see a single person that's been brought to me be close to remotely qualifying for
Where you're comfortable pursuing one of those paths. That
absolutely,
makes sense. So it
absolutely.
seems like it's better make sure your spouse is working, the spouse gets a
Yes,
job, or you have the capital and you do the EB-5.
right. But yeah, I mean, there's groups overseas and offering EB1 national interest waivers and alien extraordinary abilities as cheaper and quicker options in
Yeah,
EB-5.
I mean, I remember someone came in our office before the pandemic,
Hmm.
and the attorney referred this prospective client to do the E2. And they're
Hmm.
like, "Oh, we're actually thinking about this other special ability category."
Hmm.
I'm like, "Oh, okay. Like, who told you that?" "Oh, this other advisor." I'm like, "Okay, was your immigration attorney comfortable with doing that?" "Oh, no, he didn't think we could get it." Well, maybe listen to the professional. There's a reason he's telling you that. And sure enough, the guy owned like 2 gas stations in Brazil. He owned 2 gas stations
Yeah.
in Brazil, and maybe he was making some decent money from that, hopefully, but it didn't, from someone that doesn't know this that much, it doesn't seem like extraordinary ability.
No, so yes, so like national interest waiver, if you're going to come up with the cure for cancer, go ahead and apply.
Yeah,
If you're not, probably not.
that's
Again,
fair.
unless you have someone from some U.S. government or state government agency say what this person does is in national interest, probably not. Alien
Yeah.
of extraordinary ability, you know, you know, certain Sergey Brin when he was at Google probably could have done it, but yeah, there's a reason why these categories are so limited, because they're intentionally designed to exclusive membership in the exclusive club. So
That's well
always
said.
happy to look at these, but yeah, I mean for your gas station owner, unless he or she has come up with a solution for global warming based upon their ownership of it,
Definitely.
then
And
it's
those that are listening, because we see this a lot at Visa franchise, don't shop around for someone that's gonna tell you something you like.
mhm,
So, what Brandon's saying is what he really thinks, and he wants to keep his approval rate 100%. But
yeah.
if you're willing to go with someone that maybe there's a 20% chance of getting approved, like, just
Mhm.
know that, and you gotta kinda rely on the advisors that are experienced, and not just hear from someone that says what you wanna hear.
No, you're absolutely right, because I mean, we're in a fee for service business. I feed my family based upon the fees that people pay me to do work. So if I'm telling
Yeah.
someone it's a bad idea, it's probably a
You
really bad
wanna
idea.
work.
Right, yeah. But I mean, I'm sure, yeah, to your point, Patrick, I'm sure if you ask enough people, someone out there will say, "Oh yeah,
Let's do it.
fantastic, guaranteed approval, $25,000 fee, just
Exactly.
so
You'll find someone to say something.
yeah, and
So a couple of questions,
yes.
that we have from the line from Arshadal. Is a resale franchise which is not profitable in 2021 due to COVID worth purchasing for the E2, given it has potential to see profitability and growth when it is put in good hands?
Yeah, I would say yes. And so what's going to be very important to in getting that E2 approved with two things. One, working with, Patrick alluded to this earlier, working with an E2 specialist to put together a business plan for how you're going to take this unprofitable business and make it into a profitable business
Yeah.
based upon whatever initial investment you're going to make in that business. So, depending on the details, that an E2 such as this, should be approvable.
And we've had franchisees as well. It depends on what stage. If you're buying a franchise that's only been open for a year, but
Hmm.
you can show on the item 19 that the average sales for 300 franchisees that have been open more than 3 years is 500K. We found that's been extra ammunition
Hmm.
for someone going into the consulate, showing financials that are part of a government regulated document, the franchise disclosure document that's regulated by the FTC, regulated in many states. That, hey, it's not just me saying that these are the numbers. This is based on information from another 200 franchises.
Hmm.
And then a question from Cosme: what are the benefits to an E2 compared to the EB5 visa?
I mean, that's a great question, and I think really there's really only one, and that is that in most instances, the E2 visa holder and their family can get to the U.S. significantly faster
Yeah.
and than going directly to the EB5 route. And so, what we have a lot of is people who doing the E2 initially, getting themselves and their family here to the US in, say, 3 months, getting settled, getting everything going, and then pursuing the EB5 once they arrive in the US.
It's definitely a nice bridge
Mhm.
visa, and some people don't. I mean, part of it's a non-immigrant visa for a reason. People
Mhm.
move to the US, they move back home.
Yeah.
There's a business opportunity.
And I guess that's a second good reason too to do E2 at first. Come to the US, see if you and your family like it before committing the time and capital to doing the EB5. Because once you kind of in, invest that capital in the EB5, and it's locked up for anywhere from 6 to 8 years. And so you don't want to, if you and your family are not comfortable in the US, that's, you have a choice. Whereas if you, I guess if you had just started on the E2 and it didn't work out, you get to sell the business and move back. So yeah, so I guess it basically, that's the main advantage. Two main advantages. One, it gets you here faster, and then and if it's a bridge, but it's also a bridge back home quicker, if need be, before you pursue an EB5.
And a question from Horacio: are there a minimum number of jobs that the E2 visa business needs to create?
Great question. This is one of the numerous items that makes the E2 tricky. There's no minimum investment amount for an E2. There's also no minimum amount of jobs that need to be created. EB5 is very clear: 500,000 or a million, 10 jobs. We don't have those bright lines for the E2. So it's really up to the discretion of the officer at the consulate whether or not the number of jobs you have now and how many jobs you predict you'll have in the future and how many jobs you have at the time of renewal, whether that are sufficient. So basically, is three good? Could be. Is five better? Absolutely. Is 10 better than five? Fantastic. What about 20? Yeah, go hire 20. Same thing. More is always preferred to less. I
I
mean,
like that. It makes a
yeah.
lot of sense. I mean, you kind of dumb it down where it is it's pretty basic.
Yeah, I mean, it's simple. I mean, it's the same thing. When I see E2s, and we didn't mention L1s, but it's kind of the cousin of the E2 in a lot of ways, is that when these fail is because people try to slice the salami too thin.
Exactly.
They try to do it too fine margins, and that's tends to be the failure. So yeah. So and this is what I tell people for E2 and EB5 is that chances are, you know, especially like when if I go to a country like say Vietnam and people are like, why do I want to do that $500,000 EB5 when I can just do E2 for 150,000? Okay, and I say, well, or L1 or whatever it is, and I say, you
Yeah.
know what? Okay, I matrix it out. The EB5 rates approval rates are much higher. The initial E2 rates very high as well, but you look at the L1, it's probably going to more steps, more places to fail, and it's probably going to end up costing you, if you want to do it right, it's probably going to end up costing you more than the
We had a
$500,000.
client do the L1 a couple years back. Urgent care
Hmm.
franchise. It was like 1.2 mil for
Yeah,
L1 and EB1C.
yeah.
15, 20 jobs, $1.2 million investment.
I mean, if you
That
have that, great. Yeah,
yeah,
that sounds like instantly approvable to me. But not everyone has the 1.2. So not every business can get up to 15 people. So and Mr. Hidalgo, so yeah, no minimum, but the more is always better than less.
and just wrapping up, Horacio had a question. Just if every Latin American country was E2, not every countries like Ecuador no longer, Bolivia no longer, Venezuela no,
Mhm.
Guatemala no, El Salvador no. We have a list on our website, visafranchise.com, or even better is just to go on the Department of State website and you can
Mhm.
see the most recent E2 visa countries.
Yeah.
Um,
Brazil, no.
Brazil no,
Hmm.
a big one in Latin America. And then from Fadi, sorry, yeah, from Fadi, is an online business owner entrepreneur basically for an online business owner, are they eligible for the E2 visa,
I
Brendan?
think it's going to be a very hard sell at the
Okay.
consulate. I mean, this is the thing that it's not just the E2, but it kind of pervades all U.S. immigration all visa categories. Is that the U.S. government bureaucracy is still kind of stuck in 1950s style of doing business. For example, if let's say I had a founder, managing partner of my law firm, if I was doing an L1 for myself, and if I put in there that occasionally on Fridays I take out the recycling, USCIS is going to deny my visa. Why? Because they're like, managers and executives don't take out the trash. They have
Yeah.
a very traditional view of the way business is done. It's only recently in the E2 context did Department of State, who front line of E2s, come out and say you can actually have a home office for an E2. It
That
took
was
them a
very
very
recent.
long time. It's very contentious to get to that point. And so you have to think these are U.S. government bureaucrats. If you give them something to think about, that's bad.
Yeah, dumb
That's
it down,
very
right?
bad. If they have to start making independent decisions and thinking about things, and that's really bad. So basically, if you give them something they're not accustomed to seeing, it's probably not going to
Make their
achieve
job easy, right? I mean, they're
make their
going
job
through
easy.
hundreds of these cases. Well, you
Yeah.
get make it clear, communicate it to them clearly, and
So what I would do, nothing would preclude you, Fadi, from coming to the U.S. initially on a more traditional E2 style business, and then once you're here, pursuing what it is you really want to do, your online business. You can make that basically after you're here. You can make that as an add-on business to your existing E2 business.
we've
But
had clients like basically set up a family office investment vehicle, and they have like an anchor
mhm,
franchise, and that
yes,
could be like a technology business in a Walmart, and you put in a day-to-day manager, and then you can do other things as part of that holding company.
absolutely, absolutely. That might be the way. That might be something for you to consider.
Yeah. And then Cosme had another question. Is there a minimum amount of money if I hire Visa franchise or Brandon? So generally, we'll have an initial consultation where we charge a fixed fee of $189, but it's fully refundable. If you don't like it, I'll give you the money back. I've never had someone ask for the money back, but I've had the consultation go 5 or 10 minutes, and I return the funds because we can't help you, and then I can connect you to an advisor that can help you.
Mhm.
And then there's all different types of services that we provide, so we would quote that following the conversation. Um, I think that's pretty much it. We're almost to the top of the hour. I really appreciate, Brendan, you joining today,
No,
and
thank
for all
you.
the participants that asked questions. And
Mhm.
we'll be sure again to include Brandon's contact information as well as for Visa franchise for anyone that would like to further discuss this case. And it's all personalized, whether it's immigration. Brandon went through so many different options on not just the E2 visa, but E1, L1, all these EB category green cards. There's a lot of options there. And then same thing on the business side. So we can help you if it's a franchise, either a new franchise or a resale. If you want to buy an independent existing business, we do have a network of business brokers we'd be happy to connect you with. And then the startup, we don't do the startup, but we can get you an advisor to help with the startup.
Mhm. Yeah, great discussion, great questions. I think this was definitely very good time well spent.
Oh, and one closing thing, Brennan. There was some positive news I think that came out a month ago where, if I understand it correctly, someone can apply for the E2 visa and then the spouse gets work authorization right away, or they don't have to go through that bureaucratic
Yeah,
process.
that's a great update. So what was happening before was after the whole family entered the U.S. On their E2s, then the spouse could apply for independent work permit based upon his or her E2 status. But they couldn't work until the actual work permit, which looks like a driver's license, was issued. And over the past, the processing times,
It take a
were
while, like
like,
6 months plus.
yeah, I mean, they were up to like 12, 15 months at one point. So
Jeez.
it's completely ridiculous. So a group of people sued the U.S. government saying that E2 spouses shouldn't have to, that basically once they come to the U.S. and the E2 status is good enough on its own and shouldn't have to apply for separately for a work permit and wait 6, 12, 15, 18 months. And we as an industry, I was not participating in that suit, but we as an industry won that suit. So now E2 spouse comes in, they get stamped in their passport E2. When they go to apply for jobs, that E2 stamp in their passport is good enough to demonstrate the right to work in the U.S.
And
So
I think one thing on the right to work and the job market, because a lot of especially our clients coming from Europe, it's very protective. It's very hard to get fired. But on the other side, it's very hard to get hired.
Right.
And it takes months and months to get hired.
Mm-hmm.
Where the US, you can get fired fast for any reason.
Yeah.
But you can also get hired very fast.
Yeah. And so you take your passport and show that's E2 stamp and you're good to go. And definitely move the timeline forward. So you can get that job at Facebook or Google and or wherever else and have the EB2 or EB3 done.
And it gives a little less pressure, especially if it's like a startup business, to break even and start producing from that business. If you have the spouse that's also working, and
that's
help
true
support
too.
the
Yes.
family together.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Cool. Well,
Definitely.
Brandon, really appreciate it. I just wanted to add that one point in. I
No,
just
that's
thought
great.
about it.
I apologize for overlooking that. That's
No,
definitely a good one.
thanks so much. You explained it super well. And again, we're going to leave Brandon's contact as well as for Visa franchise for anyone that would like a consultation. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy it.